there was also an improvement in stewardship. If you're a numbers person, I'll give you this real quick. When we first started CCC, the very first weekend, and this shows you kind of the difference between the initial church plant and then starting the second site. We had 465 people show up the first weekend. We had about 180 stick around for the first quarter average attendance. We had about a 39% retention rate. We'll call this day one, first quarter, and then retention rate. All right? That was our first site, our first church plant. We started the second location. We had 552 people show up in the first weekend. Watch this. We had 360 stick around, and our retention rate was 64%. That's a big difference right there. For about the same dollars, too. Both locations. We started a third site. We had 603 people show up. We had about 350 stick around, average first quarter attendance. That gave us about a 58% retention rate. And that time, if you're kind of if you're interested in that, was with video teaching. All right. So the difference between these two is almost negligible. It was still significantly greater than this one. And what we've discovered, as one of our finance guys puts it, as far as dollars for butts in the seat, you get a little better return here. And that's what we feel like it's a kind of a better stewardship. I'll tell you what, let's keep moving. Let's go on to the next one. Improve followership. I can talk more about that later. But let me give you a couple things on far as facilities I've been thinking about too, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. We got a panel. A couple things hit me as I talk about facilities in the multi-site church. I think one thing we are seeing a lot of it, and I don't know how this serves your purposes, but this is just the reality, is there are a lot more nomadic churches, as Bill Easom calls them. In a 1998 survey, 14% of all churches in the United States, I think your handout says want, but it should say rent space in schools or public facilities. Rent space in schools or public facilities. In 2001, a survey showed of all churches started since 1945, half of them began in the 90s, following with this, and the majority of those churches do not have their own facility. And what we're talking about here is this whole new breed of kind of nomadic churches, and multi-site churches are a part of those nomadic churches. 55% of multi-site churches meet in schools. Now, I don't know if that's, and part of that, is that the way it's going to be in the future? Or is that just the way it is right now because this whole thing's still so brand new? 13% meet in movie theaters. 13% meet in community centers and YMCAs. And I am convinced that we can't build buildings big enough or fast enough to do or to keep up with what God wants us to do. In fact, I was doing a Defining Moments CD with the Willow Creek Association. When you do a Defining Moments CD, Bill always does part of the interview, and so you get to go in Bill's office and all that, and sometimes I get kind of excited and I forget where I am. And so we're talking multi-site, that was the topic, and one of the guys asked me a question, and you have to remember the setting here. Bill had just been through a $100 million building campaign at Willow, and I said, you know what, everybody knows you can't build buildings big enough or fast enough to keep up with what God wants to do. And he just goes, hold it, cut the tape for a second. What was that? I was like, oh, well, I mean. But I love what they're doing. I'm a huge fan, but I think it is true. I do think that's true. So I think there's going to be a whole bunch of these kind of nomadic churches. Now, that might be even the reality in the future, or maybe it's huge opportunities for what a lot of you are doing. A second thing I see a lot of churches that are now either building or moving into third places. I think we've already discussed this. This is probably redundant. Ray Oldenburg, we've had him consult on some of our stuff, the same guy who consulted with Starbucks when they made their transition from selling coffee to really selling community. He talks about the first places where you live, second places where you work, and the third places where you hang out. I think for us at CCC, we just had a small forum with about 60 people that came from all across the country of builders, developers, architects, and pastors called Creating Genuine Community. There's a brand new thing happening in new urbanism, I think, in this whole neo-traditional design of communities that with shared spaces that are seen, I think there's a handful of people anyway, we're beginning to see how churches can play a very, very important role in that. And we have two different developers in our church. One's a guy by the name of Perry Bigelow, who was named Professional Builder of the Year last year by Professional Builder magazine. He's up to some awesome stuff and believes in this. I already told you about Bruno and Nick. They're still doing that, and they're developing a brand called New American Towns. We do need, having said all that, I think there are going to be churches in third places. I think there's going to be a lot of nomadic churches. The reality is, and I'm not really a big fan of buildings, okay? The reality, though, is that we are going to need a place. Multi-site churches are going to need a place. Lyle Shaller's words still kind of haunt me. I can hear him telling me, "Hey, Dave, the most overlooked aspect of new church development is the importance of place." All right, and I think partly because of the way I'm wired as an entrepreneur, and I kind of like think innovatively more in the future, I don't think maybe I have quite as much need of that as other people do, but most people do. And I know the reality is for us, for example, when we moved into our yellow box, and we call it a yellow box. Everybody in Naperville calls it a yellow box. In April, we saw the truth in our mission. We saw a 57% increase in attendance at that site, right? And so, I mean, the truth is, a building was a big, big, big help to us. When we at our Romeoville site, where I tell you about the builder there, they actually built a community center. This is the yellow box is actually the 2.0. They built a community center, and that was the 1.0. So across the street, because they already had that, we built this Children's and Arts Center. And we built this Children's and Arts Center at our Romeoville location. Again, our growth rate, I think, more than doubled as a result of that. And also, they started a new site that same year. So what we are seeing is, yeah, it is true that multi-sites, even though there are going to be a lot of nomadic churches, they're going to be moving into third places, maybe even building third places. They're going to need places.